put your seatbelts on. We're going to go on a roller coaster and we're going to go through this and we go up and down in a roller coaster. If you don't like a roller coaster, think about the roundabout when you sit on the horse and you go up and down on just a very slow horse going round in a carousel, which everyone you need to put your seatbelt on anyway. So put your seatbelt on. Let's see what we can do and let's go for it. Yes, I'm a professor. There's only out of 8,500 in our university, which is UCL. There are 8,500 academics, and there's around about 21 full professors, which are black. So that's a starting point, right? I'm also Vice Dean as well of EDI, and I also chair Athena Swan. You have JEPs, GEPs, we have Athena Swan. So the same type of thing, but we've got Athena Swan. And there's my email if you need my email. I'm now going to move on to the next slide. If you can't see the slides at any time, please don't let me talk for 10 minutes with not seeing the slide. Just say, Victoria, we can't see the slide. So the session outline, this is what I'm hoping to do with you. I'm going to go for the introduction, which I'm going to do now. I'm going to do session objectives, which have already been done because Kiki's already done that. Icebreaker, so what is intersectionality? There's going to be some input and you can interact with the chat as well. I'm going to take 3 different things, but there'll be others. And also intersectionality in practice, so you can see what's going on. Positionality as a practitioner and unjustified and or unfair biases. We have a discussion around that. That's what it's going to look like. Please don't hold me 100% to that because there'll be things where they're spending more time on this or more time on that. But this is the kind of outline which I hope to get through. But if we don't, it's okay. So the first thing I'm going to do an icebreaker with you. And I want to ask you this particular question, which is which lens do you bring today is the first thing. And you can put this in the chat. So when you're sitting here today on screen, which lens do you bring today? And you can see there's a lens here as a picture. Which lens do you bring today? Just put it in the chat and let's see what you have to say. So my lens, what lens do I bring today? Well, one of the lenses I bring today as a trainer. So I bring that. I might also bring in my lens as a feminist. That's the lens I bring in. So it's really kind of what kind of lens do you bring in today? Let's just see. I'll give you a few minutes to put down. Okay, so start putting them down and I can just see what they're saying on here. All right. So any thoughts as you start to see what's in the chat? Any thoughts of that? About the lenses which people are bringing in, and perhaps as you think about it, what lens haven't been mentioned? So there's mentions around curiosity. There's mentions around quite a few teachers in the room. You've got an economist who thinks she's quite unique because they are economists, psychologists. Um, you've got quite a few feminists. You've got a man with quotes, maybe just one. I don't know. There's some other men in the room. Um, Diversity, thinking about that. You want to learn. You've got your learning lens on. Ableism, a range of different things which are here. Anything at all. And if you want to say anything, just you can shout out. It's fine. There's not 1,000 of you. Is there anything anybody would like to say which kind of just alerts something to start with? And also I noticed there's HR. There's HR as well, which I thought was quite good. Mothers, some mothers they've got their mothers on there. One person's mentioned white. I noticed one person's mentioned that. That's a sociologist and a woman. Um, no age has been mentioned at all. There's no age. There's ableism, but no age. No one's mentioned to do anything with LGBTQ plus. I've noticed what lenses around there. So it's quite interesting when you see what hasn't been mentioned. Nothing around religion at all. There's no lens of that in this particular space. Global, yeah, global human being, which is an interesting term. Is that a cop out or is that a meaningful point? So we will start to play with these a little bit more. Right. Any thoughts before I move on? So that's just a little snapshot. I'm now going to move to the next thing, next slide. So that's mapping researchers and thinking about the lens which you're bringing to this particular session today. Now I'm going to look at this. Look at that slide. Besides the big words, what jumps out? Anything interesting jumps out of here? Any thoughts? Okay, you put it in here, tokenism, right? Is this the one for this, where people have put this in the chat? They've got tokenism, fear. Dana, is that fear coming from this? Hello, Dana. Is it Dana?
Hello.
Dana. Hi,
Hello.
Dana.
Hello.
Yes, hi,
Hello.
Dana. Yes, I've got somebody
Yes.
talking to me. Good. So, yes.
Oh, okay. By the way, I like your English very much.
Yeah, thank you. So, Dana, tell me more about fear. You've put down fear. What's going on with fear?
Uh, because of the fear, and we don't admit that we have this kind of feeling. We cannot accept open-minded some other opinion, some other people different from us, and fear it's one of the feeling that can put you down.
Okay, okay, that's a really good point. Yes, the fear and what that actually means is an important point because you can be thinking to yourself, you know what, I've never ever spoken to in quotes a refugee. Unless somebody identifies themselves as a refugee, you don't know that they are a refugee, unless, of course, they're living in a certain area or they're part of a project you're working at. You're walking along the street, you may not actually know that they're asylum seeker or refugee unless they've got the big label on their back, which they don't always have a big label on their back. So these types of things, and you might be fearful because when you are introduced or you're working with a group of people which are refugees or they're from or they're asylum seekers, you might be fearful, you might say the wrong thing, or you might, you might be concerned about the political aspects and all those types of things. That's fear as well. The same thing if you're, how many of you have had conversations with somebody looking like me? You may not have. And then that kind of is quite nerve-wracking because you're thinking, oh, I've never spoken to somebody looking like Victoria before, except if they're a student and now she's an academic and she's a professor. How do I deal with her? Do I all my fears which are coming forward? Somebody put trust in there as well. What's about the trust and all these types of stuff. So that's really important. So I just wanted you to look at that because these are the types of things we will you will touch on when we're talking about, together. I am going to do the next task, which is, well, first of all, these are just small things. As I move forward, I'm wanting you to get used to talking. I mean, so far it's just myself and Dana, who've spoken so far, and of course Kiki spoke at the beginning. So I'm going to be wanting you all to start to talk because otherwise, if you don't talk, you don't actually feel what's going on. You're just watching it, and I want you to be part of it. I'm going to look at this next one here and what that actually means. So if we think about um, trying to put this at the bottom, let's see if I can move this at the bottom. Um, defining intersectionality, there's going to be different ways of defining it. So I want you to move, we're going to move from the abstract definition to discipline specific practice and oriented understanding of intersectionality. So we'll play with some abstract definitions and then we're moving to discipline specific and practice around orientated understanding of intersectionality. So at the moment, we're just going to take steps by step. So I want to now going to put you into groups. But before we go to the groups, I want you to take a picture of this, and so we can understand this. I'm trying to move this out the way, so I don't know how to do it. Oh yeah, there you go. Maybe not. Oops. So what I want to do is, you've got three tasks I want you to do. In one sentence, you're going to, how do you define intersectionality in the context of your work? Number two, identify one way intersectionality changes or challenges how research is usually done in Europe. And like I said, to consider methods, sampling, data interpretation, etc. And give one concrete example from your field. So that's what you're going to do in breakout groups. Now you might think, well, what is intersectionality? Well, I deliberately haven't given you a definition as such, because I want you to just unpack. Now, if you think about the word, it's intersectional, meaning I want you to think about yourself first of all. Who are you, and what lens you bring to this, and what you are, what you see as your complexity. I see myself as a woman because I am a woman. I see myself as a woman, and I see myself as black, as a black female, and I also see myself as because we talk about class quite a lot in the United Kingdom. I came from a very upper class background, and I was adopted by white German Jewish parents. So I'm very much intersectional. I don't have a whole range of identities. We'll talk about that in a moment, but they're the three things which are constructual, oppressive aspects to my life: gender, race, and class. Three clear pillars. You may be different. There may be things you might feel that as a young person or an older person, that is something which is you want to connect with as part of the lens you use. I don't know. But I've asked you this. You're going to go into breakout groups in a moment. Take a picture of this so you've got an understanding what it is. The first sentence is in one sentence. How do you define intersectionality in the context of your work? The second one is identify one way intersectionality changes or challenges how research is usually done in Europe. And we think about methods, things like that. And then give one concrete example from your field. With that, this is the roles. You need two. You've got a role. You've got a timekeeper who keeps the conversation going, note taker, jots down 3 bullet points, and spokesperson. That's who we've got, and you provide 1 minute for summary. Because I can't see properly, Kiki. How many people have we got? Do you know?
We are 34 people at the
30,
moment.
34 at the moment. Okay, so we can do some groups of six in each group, do you think?
Okay, yeah. So around 5 groups. Then
Five groups. Yeah, 5 groups would be fantastic. So we're going to do 5 groups, and they're going to be 10 minutes, and they're going to be random. So, you're online anyway, so it's not that you're sitting next to somebody. So you're going to be random, 10 minutes, and the group. And Kiki's going to put them into groups, or somebody's going to, yeah?
Yeah. I'm going to do it at the moment, right?
Yeah, fantastic. I'm just going to get my so let's start with group 5. Group 5. Can you just tell me a couple of in a minute, 1 minute you've got, just to tell me what kind of things it might mean that you focus on question 1 or 2 or 3, or you focus on all of them. I don't know, but what kind of things were you discussing? What emerged out of your discussion? You've got 1 minute. Melina, do you want to speak?
Yeah, I can tell on behalf of group number 5, we wanted to introduce ourselves. So that's the time that we spent majority on. We come from different backgrounds, and I think that our colleague who works in the HR spoke about the very fine examples of intersectionality in her work, that she has to take into account all kinds of things like age and experience and background and in her work, which was nice. What we ended up with is that the question how to train or how to educate or how to make aware people who don't want to be trained in this field. So we are here because we want to, we are sensitive to at least some aspects, but how to reach out to the others and change some things. That was what we ended up with.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's really helpful. And as we move forward in this work, which I'm doing with you, there will be lots of different things you could practically as well, how you can make change. Right. Thank you very much. So group number 4, if there's a group number 4, if they can speak. I don't know who's in group number 4. If you've got somebody, is group number 4 active?
Yes.
Fantastic.
We were group number 4. Okay, so we talk about...
And your name is?
Yeah, sorry, Anna.
Anna. Hi, Anna. Yes.
Very quickly, we spoke about the question of identity and being respectful of different identities, but also we spoke about taking into account the historical, political, and economic processes when we are looking at the world. We talk about intersectionality as a tool to analyze data and for designing equality interventions. But the two main points were the matter of identity and the matter of the structural view and structural processes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. So we're moving very swiftly, which is good. Thank you. So number 3, is number 3 active?
Hello,
Hi.
Christina.
Christina. Hi, Christina.
So in the room number 3, we try to define intersectionality. Now that in our research, we try to take under consideration different aspects of identity. And that framing helps us in how we approach things, how we choose our topics, and how we understand our topics. Also, we talked about the gender equality plans and how they brought the attention to the gender aspect and how we wish to make this more inclusive and add other elements in our research. Then we talk about other things as to how we collect data, how intersectionality makes our work broader but also harder, and that there is the danger that intersectionality on the one hand gives you like a broader framework, but it gives you also the doubt which comes with being aware that you research something, but at the same time, there are things that you left.
Okay, thank you very much. That was very thorough. Thank you, Christina. And group number 2.
Yes. Hello, I'm Stephanie. So we also
Hi,
took
Stephanie.
quite a bit of time to introduce ourselves, so we mostly addressed the first question, and we discussed intersectionality as a methodology that is based, first of all, of understanding one's personal situatedness, and we talked about identity and vulnerability and the relationship between them, and that is furthered by a collaborative approach to the generation of knowledge and to praxis. And also on how it challenges research in Europe. It makes work, as Christina also said before, broader and deeper at the same time. So a bit more complex for researchers too. And it also stops us from, one of the colleagues in the group mentioned, from using, for example, buzzwords as gender, as proxy for women, from simplifying matters, and actually looking into all the strata that go into constructing exposure or vulnerability.
Thank you, Stephanie. That's really helpful. And so we have group number 1, I think, left.
We have no group 1.
We don't have group 1. Group 1's done. Okay, right. Okay. So that was really helpful, actually. What did you think about that? Was that helpful just to have that conversation between you? You just need to put a thumbs up or you can shout or whatever you want to do, but it's nice to get some engagement. Yes, right. Thumbs up. Thank you very much. You can see that I was one of the first people to do online teaching for my class, and in 2020 it was not easy because I was doing sociology of race, and at the same time halfway through teaching the class in April, in June, because it was a 10-week course, George Floyd was murdered, and so my class became a very difficult space for students because we were talking about race and there was a lot of emotions around it. And it was my first online course, but it was amazing. And the assignments they did out of that is now going to be in a book, which I'll tell you about later. But yes, so I'm very interested in, put your thumbs up, shout out, whatever it is, so I know you're feeling. Right. Moving on. You can see it, can't you?
Yes. It's the
Brilliant.
first slide.
Yep, you can see the first slide. Yeah, it's fine. So, done that. Here's some quick definitions of intersectionality. You've got 3 different people, which is Anne Phoenix, who's at my university. She was doing work around intersectionality, and she says intersectionality aims to make visible the multiple positioning that constitutes everyday life and power relations that are central to it. So that's one aspect of one thinking about it. Then you've got Prince. Gender has always lived in the modalities of ethnicity, class, and nationality, in the modalities of gender and race and class, in the modalities of gender and nationality. So you've got already starting to think about what it means, and it is quite complex. But also, and then we've got Kimberly, and we're going to see Kimberly in a moment, because the intersectional experience is greater than the sum of racism and sexism. Any analysis that does not take intersectionality into account cannot sufficiently address the particular manner in which Black women are subordinated. I hope by the end of this whole session with me that you will start to understand that gender needs to include others as part of that. So me being a Black female, you shouldn't be telling me that race is over there. So you need to start looking at ethnicity, and then you can become in that data, because it misses me out as a person in gender. So we will continue to have this conversation as we move forward. I want to take my voice away, and I want to bring up Kimberly Crenshaw's work, which will be 2 very short YouTube clips. One is going to be on intersectionality, the big idea. It's a couple of minutes. And the other one is what everyone gets wrong about intersectionality. So you're going to watch these 2, just make some notes, just some bullet points, 1 word, 2 words, as you're thinking about them. I'm going to move it over to Kiki, who's going to put the videos on for me. Thank you.
So intersectionality actually came out of my effort to think about how to create a word picture so that people could understand what happens when the kind of inequality that they're prepared to deal with overlaps or has an encounter with the kind of inequality that they're not committed to, haven't even thought about, don't experience it themselves, and don't necessarily feel called upon to be present in that. Intersectionality is also a frame. It's a frame that gives us a greater sense of how certain social problems come about, and importantly, what needs to be rethought in terms of the conventional interventions that we create for those inequalities when those interventions come out of narrow or non-intersectional frames. I came across a case that featured a woman named Emma de Graffenried. She was actually representing an entire group of Black women who were seeking better employment opportunities at an auto manufacturing plant in the Midwest. She was a wife, she was a mom, she was working class, she was really hoping to advance her family's well-being by seeking a different kind of job than the ones that typically were set aside for a woman like her. A job as a domestic worker, or a job as a janitorial engineer. These were the kinds of jobs that were underpaid and that were usually without benefits. They weren't the kind of job that would allow you to actually entertain middle-class aspirations. So she was trying to get one of those better manufacturing jobs. So she applied for the job, and like other Black women, she was denied. After her denial, she sued the employer, claiming race and gender discrimination. Now, the judge that heard Emma's case dismissed her suit. And he dismissed her suit because the employer in question had, in fact, hired African Americans, and the employer had, in fact, hired women. From the court's vantage point, the fact that they'd hired African Americans and had hired women meant that they did not engage in race discrimination and they didn't engage in gender discrimination. Now, the fact that the African Americans they hired were not women, and the women that they hired were not African Americans, didn't defeat the argument that these women were unable to prove discrimination because the employer had hired blacks and had hired women. So from the court's vantage point, the problem was that for Emma to be able to say, I was discriminated against, she had to say, I was discriminated against as a black person who's a woman. I was discriminated against as a woman who's a black person. That's what she would have had to say. And the court thought that the law didn't allow her to combine these two causes of action into one. But the fact that no judge ever stopped to think, well, why is this not a symmetrical disability? How come a white class plaintiff can represent all women even though there are differences within them, but a woman of color can't represent everyone, and the same with respect to men. So what we had here was a problem of the belief that women of color were a category in and of themselves. They could not represent themselves on their own, nor could they represent all women or all men. And this is the moment when I really started thinking about pre-existing schemas. You've heard about the story about the father who rushes his son to the hospital who's had an accident. And the surgeon begins to operate and then realizes, oh no, I can't, it's my son. And everyone's stumped by this. How can the father rush him to the hospital? And the surgeon says, he's my son too. Until it hits you, duh, the surgeon is a woman. But that it takes that extra moment for it to lock into place. Now, just add into that race, class, any other kind of schema that takes even longer for it to lock in, that your pre-existing assumptions about who this person was were all wrong. That's the space for intersectionality.
Okay, let's just stop there for one moment. I want you to just write some points down, just a word, 2 words. We're not going to share them at the moment. Just put those points down. You're going to have a break in a minute after you've seen the next YouTube. You can have a break. All right, just put some points down of what you were thinking when you just saw that. Okay, so I've given you a minute just to write some points down. We're fast moving. I'm now going to show you another video, a YouTube clip. And again, this was even less time. I think it's about 1.5 minutes. And this is really important because it is called What is Intersectionality and what everyone gets wrong about intersectionality. So you've got one which is explaining it in very small terms. And hopefully that was very clear. And then, so what is it that you get wrong with intersectionality? Let's just put that one on as well.
Particularly those who haven't followed demarginalizing from its initial iteration, often mistakenly think that intersectionality is only about multiple identities. I've got 3, you've got 6, the identity question goes on and on. Some colleagues in Germany undertook to count how many intersections there are. Last count, there were like 17 or something. There was an attempt to map them all. That's not, at least my articulation of intersectionality. Intersectionality is not primarily about identity. It's about how structures make certain identities the consequence of and the vehicle for vulnerability. So if you want to know how many intersections matter, you've got to look at the context. What's happening? What kind of discrimination is going on? What are the policies? What are the institutional structures that play a role in contributing to the exclusion of some people and not others? A lot of people, particularly those...
Fantastic. Thank you. So again, put some bullet points down. You're also going to have a 5-minute break. And I will see you back here in 5 minutes. I'll put the timer on. It's now 12. Well, in my country, it's 12:17. In your country, it's 1:17, I think. I don't know. Well, whatever country you're in. And I'll see you in 5 minutes' time. I'm gonna put the timer.
Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully you got yourself a drink, or you went out and had a cigarette, or you had some fresh air, or whatever you decided to do, but you're now back in front of the screen. So there wasn't time to eat breakfast, though, unfortunately, unless you ate very fast. So I'm going to now just ask just very quickly, what's your thinking about those two YouTube clips, which we put out there? Very simple. You will have all the PowerPoint slides, so don't worry, you'll have the slides so you can think. Any just very quick points in point, because we've got the time's running out and I've got about an hour to do the rest of it. Let me move out my slide on to the next thing.
Maybe you can reshare, Victoria, because
Sorry,
took
say that again. Sorry, say it again.
please, can you share your screen again?
Yes,
Because
I'm just about to do it. I was just about to do it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, done that one. So I am going to go through a very quick presentation on 3 things, and it's just very quick. One on race and ethnicity, one on gender, and one on class. I'm going to do it very quickly. Then I'm going to do another breakout group. Then I'm going to do something else, and then I'm going to do another one. All right, so I want to get through this. But some of you know a lot of this, but I just wanted to just mention because I only have a small amount of time, so don't expect you're going to learn everything, but I can always spend some time with you another time to do something on one of these if you want more. So the first thing I'm looking at is race and ethnicity. That's the first thing, and there is a difference between the two as well. So ethnicity is around the ethnic aspect of somebody, and whether it could be Jewish, it could be somebody who's Muslim, it could be that particular aspect of their ethnic background. And then race is really, I've got a definition of what race is really looking at the whole concept of it's a reconstruction. It's not something which is real, but it is something which is identified as looking at somebody which is from a difference in relation to race equals somebody who is either white or somebody who is coming from a different background than somebody else. And that's been very, very simplistic about that. I've got some definitions here. I want to go on very quickly on different forms of racism. And that's the bit which makes you feel a bit prickly, because when you think about the word racism, you think that's not me. I cannot be that person, because it is a hurtful word and you don't want it to be. But there are all these bullet points here. One is historical racism. If you take 1 second to think about that and think about your country, and you can connect that with colonialism, what's going on with that? Many of you will start to hear more about that as as we talk more freely about that. In my university, we've done a lot of work with historical racism and what that means, because we were the ones who created eugenics. That's one of the things UCL is known for. It was done in 1840, and the person who was involved with that was Darwin's distant cousin, which was just 1 second, we get his name a minute. Yeah. It was Glanton, and his name was Glanton, and he was the one who did eugenics. He wanted to become famous with something, and he became famous in eugenics. So all the issues we have in the world was because of how he developed white supremacy through eugenics and physiology, etc. Right? So that's historical. And then also the empire, how the United Kingdom developed the empire, how they colonialized a lot of the areas within the country. But on top of that, of course, slavery. slavery, and many European countries were involved with slavery across the world. So historical racism. Some countries may say, oh, we didn't do any of that. But when you start to go deep, you can see that most people did it and most people benefited from it. It depends on what's going on to see whether anything is happening. Now, I know that I think it was the Netherlands, I think it was, who turned around, I think, and said that they apologized openly about what took place with slavery. Not many people apologize because they're concerned about the money it's going to connect. But our church, the United Kingdom and the Church of England, powerful church, has put by millions regarding what took place with slavery. And they're trying to rectify what's taken place. It's a big thing. Other one is individual and interpersonal racism and what that actually means. That's about you as a person, how you and yourself and your own bias and what you're actually doing with that. I was brought up by white German Jewish parents. I didn't live in a city. I grew up in a countryside, the rural area. I myself had to learn a lot about this and what that means. But the interpersonal aspect, how I connect with colleagues which are from a different country, that could be through my language, how I may get irritated, or I used to get irritated with how people pronounce words, the pronunciation, how you do the language. You'd get irritated with me and how I pronounce it. If I was speaking Italian or French or Spanish or whatever, it's how one pronounce the pronunciation of the language in the country. That in itself creates a language barrier. And also there's an element of discrimination, and people will see that is whether you get a job or whether you don't get a job. Institutional, of course, that's to do with the organization itself. Some of you started to mention that, and what happens, who gets the jobs and who gets promoted and who stays where they are. And it's not just to do with, you didn't work hard enough. It's also to do with the right fit and how the policies start to recognize what's actually taking place. The next one you would never have heard of, because it's what I designed, and it's called Sophisticated and Everyday Racism. And it's in a book, which is on the reference side is one. It's called this book. You can't see it because it's gone like that. But it's a book, and it's called Sophisticated and Everyday Racism. And that's about the fact I grew up in the rural area. And when you come to the city, the rural area is very, very outspoken about race. They will call you the N-word with no issues. They will do things which are very kind of raw, R-A-W, whereas within the city is more sophisticated. They want to be seen as that, they want to feel that they can tolerate, in quotes, different differences, but they're just as racist as the rural, but it's more covered up. Microaggressions, it could come with all different aspects. The word microaggressions when it comes to sexism. So when you're talking about racism and microaggressions, it could be they feel they have the need, people have the need to talk about my hair and they want to touch my hair as an example. Or they might talk about, if I was standing up, you'd see like I may have a bottom which is different to your bottom because your bottom might be flat and my bottom is more curved. So even talking about your body shape, or they might think about, the food you might eat, which they have no idea who you are. So cultural aspects, the different aspects of microaggressions which you take place. If you get a job and people think you got the job because that you're black and not that you had got the job because you've got the qualifications, all those things are part of microaggression. Structural racism in itself, that in itself is structurally in society, but also within the organization, and how you start to unpick that is a cultural thing. And it's really, really dismantling aspects from the culture, and it takes time. Systemic racism, well, we're seeing that play out at the present moment with a lot of stuff which is going on globally, who can go into whose country and create chaos as against who can't. And if the person's country, they then retaliate from that, then, it becomes an issue, even though the person's gone into their country, whichever country it is. These are the types of things we're talking about. And then we talk about white privilege. Now, I'm not talking about just the color white privilege. I'm talking about attributes and what that means. So all of you have been able to come to this training session. All of you may be at universities, research institutes, or where you are, you've got an element of privilege compared to the person who has not, and they're in a community. They could be the outside of whichever establishment you're in because they haven't got the privilege to be able to walk through the door. So privilege is a big thing. Privilege is invisible unless you have it. And that's something to really think about. Let's move on to another slide. So just looking at the different forms there. What I did here is it's called I call it the tangled web, and that's chapter I can't remember what chapter it is now in the book, but it's when I was in COVID, I wrote this book, and it was chapter number 2. And I was very interested in the notion of blackness because, of course, I was brought up by white parents. And what does that mean? They're Jewish, they're German, they're very upper class. I'm a country girl. What does that mean? And so the whole aspect of blackness, identity and race. And I wanted to link it to, this is where it gets a bit complicated. I use the word the big house. I lived in a big house, and I'm interested in the big house in relation to the plantation house. So the plantation house is, I call it the big house, right? And I was interested in the metaphor of that and how the different relationships take place. Relationships and power dynamics, I wanted to find out how white women and black women interconnected within the big house and how that translates into the workplace. A quick example. Here I am. I'm so excited. I'm starting a new job. So I stand up, I knock on the door, and I say, and the person opens the door, and it's the queen bee, another metaphor. She opens the door and said, "Oh, hello." And I say, "Yeah, hi, I am come for the job, and I'm here." And she talks to me, and I say, "Well, I'm a specialist around gender." And she thinks, the only person who does gender here is me, i.e. her. So you then start to have the relationship which takes place as a woman who is white and a woman who is black, sharing that same space of gender, and who starts to connect or not connect with this. And so I'm interested in this and the strategies adopted by enslaved people and how this plays out in the workplace. I'm very interested in that as well. Some black people, and I'm using the word, remember I'm using the word black, but you could use whatever word you want in that particular term. Some people, they come into the workplace and they want to be hidden. They don't want to be identified as somebody who's a rural person coming from China, perhaps, who does not really have they've only been able to get into university because they've got a scholarship. They don't want that to be seen. So, all these things and behaviors of white and black women and the interplay. And I call this, you've heard of white fragility. I go one step forward and I call it white women syndrome. I haven't got the time to go into that in big depth, but I call it white women syndrome, which is how they start to interact with this within the context of the workplace. I write a chapter in another book, which I've done, which is a book on intersectionality and epistemology and research practice. That's coming out very soon. And I'm the editor of that. And that's an exciting book which writes about this as well. Okay, so I'm trying to move this thing around so you can see it. So I mentioned here the big house, which is the plantation house. So think about that as your workplace. I call it the big house, your workplace. And I'm saying within that, you've got certain people. So you may have appointed some people from different backgrounds because you're the type of person who wants to ensure that they've got some diversity within the place, right? So one of those people could be like me. I could be a black female who comes to work with you, and I'm perhaps more of a disruptor. Another black person you might, or an Asian person you might have, which is more of an activist. Then you have somebody else who's going for another background, could be passive, and one is complicit. They're all coming to you within your workplace, and you're now dealing with that. Now, within how this makes sense within enslavement is you had those 4 different aspects, and many of them may have worked in the house. which is inside of the organization, inside of the big house, the plantation house, right? And for them to survive, you had these people on the outside in the field. So the activist and the disruptor. The passive person may have been in the house, which you may have been heard of terms like Uncle Tom and things like this. And you also may have the complicit who, again, wanted to ensure that things were kept patted down and not too much noise being made. But then you've got the disruptor and the activists who are not so much like that. When you think about an activist, you might think about Angela Davis, of course, with the Black Panther movement, all those type of people. But you have those in real life within organizations, all right? So you've got those. So sophisticated everyday racism, I'm trying to do this in a few minutes. I call it this. It's sophisticated racism is based on systemic structures designed to promote racism while disingenuously appearing to promote anti-racist or equitable policies. You know those policies you all have. I got a policy for that and a policy for that. You got your JEPs. But how active are they to really make change happen? Most are not, because it's a tick box exercise. I say this, the perpetrators would not want to be accused of racist behavior, and they pay lip service to condemning racism. Sometimes this form of racism is unconscious and subconscious. This is when you feel a little bit uncomfortable because your workplace, you've got everything, you've got your gender, your GEP, absolutely perfect. All of a sudden, I walk into your place and I've been taken on as a researcher to work with you. I'm a Black female. All of a sudden, things go upside down because everybody's excited that I'm going to be working with you. And then all of a sudden, the things just think, you know what, this is not going to work out because people start to complain, or this happens or that happens. And before you know, there's a category of stuff which is taking place because of this here. Right? I could talk more about that, but I want to move on to the next one. So the framework goes like this. The interest divergent is you want your organization to be diverse and you want to open up the door to people which don't normally come into the university from your communities. It could be somebody who's coming in from the Roma background. For the first time, you've got somebody in who's a PhD student, or they've come in as a research assistant, or whatever they've come in as. So it's an interest divergence. It's a good point for the organization to have. There's also this acute sense of privilege that you really feel that, you know, this is really good, and you become like the white savior aspect, you know, you've got that going on. And then you're trying to shield in of the racist ideals and what is going on. And then there's disingenuous support around this. There's support because, you know, and then people behind the back door will say, well, how comes they've got support to do this? And what about the people who grew up in the area or live in that area? Why don't they get that support? All of this contributes to sophisticated racism and what that means, right? Stop for a moment. That was just a whistle float in relation to race and ethnicity. Let's think about this. This one you'll know more because you're more likely, most of you are going to be doing stuff around gender and feminism. I remember I'm a feminist, but I get introduced as a race expert, but I've always been a feminist. All my work, if you look at it, is gender. But, you know, that's uncomfortable for people to think about that with me. So just very quickly around this, you've got feminist theories. They provide, of course, feminist and understand equality and what that actually means, which is an important point. And early feminist separation of sex, of course, as biological and fixed, and gender as social. But of course, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. That's one of the ways that I thought about that in 1973. I'm just taking review some of the thinking around this, and then as we move into the 80s, later feminists become more popular in 1980s and 1960s. Also, the sex itself as a socially constructed. So the language changed from the 60s, 70s to the 80s, and gender social constructs. builds aspects of social structures that were embedded in curriculum, pedagogy, and other practices. So that became tame, which was quite good. And when you think about Audre Lorde, I'm not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. If you haven't read Audre Lorde, do read her work. It really would help you with aspects around intersectionality. You might also think to yourself, so okay, when I think about intersectionality and I'm thinking about my work, how does society influence gender socialization? How does society reproduce gender inequalities? At the macro level, it's going to be national, global employment structures, capitalism, neoliberalism, family structures, etc., legal structures, language, culture, knowledge, educational policy, all of that. At the meso level, the role of research of education, pedagogy, curricula, wider social settings, and producing and challenging at times gendered norms of behavior. You're not acting like a woman, you're not acting like this, you're not like being like this, all of that. If you then put that another aspect on it, whoever it is, whether it's somebody from Southeast Asia, whether it's somebody from the global South in another way, or whether it's from the North, people, there's an expectation how they think you're going to be acting, right? The heteronormality and what that action, what that means as well. And then how society influences gender socialization and how society reproduces gender inequalities. How you might see me as a Black woman, you might think, and I might be just talking to you, all of a sudden you think, you start to say to me, well, you know, there's no need for you to speak to me in that particular way. And I'm speaking in the same way as Kiki's speaking to you, but you see me, because of your bias, you use the word aggression. So you think I'm being aggressive because I'm speaking in the same way, but you see me and you don't see me because I'm visible, but I'm invisible. And so my voice, all you think is my voice is becoming aggressive, but actually I'm speaking, I'm quite confident about what I'm saying. But it's aggressive for one group of people and becomes confident in another group of people. This is how we start to socialize aspects around gender and also how it is within race and also class. The intersectional feminism, women and men, and the social environments and structures embody races, ethnicities, abilities, sexualities, genders, and so forth. That is something which we're grappling with all the time, and it catches you out in many different ways. The reason I'm working fast on this because I want you to do a couple of things. Which brings you to this one, which we don't really talk about that much. I'm talking about it more and more because in some ways class is something which is fundamental to something I really need to talk about, because I grew up in a very upper class background. What does that mean? It means I'm not working class, I'm not middle class, but I'm kind of up there with you know, whoever the elites are. I didn't really understand that because I didn't understand that because, like you say, when privilege is invisible unless you have it. I'm not saying I had a lot of money, because if you really are part of that, it's all about land. It's not about things and items. It's not about all of that. That's new money. I'm talking about old money. So class in itself is really is good to understand when you're thinking about intersectional. Class is a big one to talk about. So of course, when you think about class and you've got the aspects here about Marx and Engels and what that means, and you've got feminist Marxists and socialist debates on labor and capitalism, 1980s, of course, Black feminism and intersectionality started to come in. The cultural studies bringing embodiment and respectability, they were all coming in as well. And it's an important point. So, you know, to think about where does class fit into what I'm thinking about. You've got here the respectability is never just an individual attribute. It is produced through classed and gendered relations of power, definitely. I talk to my students, I talk to colleagues about this all the time, how things work out, how things are. You're not the right type of person, or I didn't know you were like that, or we can accept you because of, and it's normally because of you fit into what they see as your class. I remember one of my supervisors at one stage, when I had later on when I was nearly finished, because my other supervisor moved to another university, and he was talking to me one time, and he was talking and he was mentioning about working class, etc. And I wasn't quite sure when to tell him, when to interrupt him about what he was saying, which was, actually, I'm not from a working class background, and some of the things examples you're speaking don't speak to me. He was very upset because he thought all black people were the same, and he didn't talk to me again. Well, it was absolutely fine. But I'm just giving you as an example there. Why does class matter? That's a big question. And you need to think, why does it matter? But you might think it doesn't happen in your countries, but it more likely happens, but it's more covered. It's not coming out in the open, it's covered instead. Class intersects with race and gender to determine access to education, housing, healthcare, employment, etc., etc. All of that is part of that discussion. When we look at social identity, class affects belonging. How does one belong? Even doing this session here, Kiki knows who I am, and so she's invited me. She may not have invited me. She may have invited a white woman to do this for you because it's easier to be able to engage with that. So I appreciate the fact that she's opened up the door for me to do this. Whereas other projects, they think, well, you know what? We don't like what Victoria's doing because she's talking about identities. Well, actually, I'm not talking about identities. What I'm talking about, you need to, why are you doing the work of intersectionality if you can't understand who you are before you start looking at how other people are? And that's a really important point. So social identity, class affects belonging, stigma, and cultural capital. That is so important when we think about this as well. Power and privilege, middle class status can buffer discrimination in many ways, while working class and poor identities compound. I mean, I have students who are very timid. They feel that they can't just kind of knock on the door and put their head through and say, Victoria, can I speak to you? But they stand outside and can wait for ages and then text. Well, I've now given them, they text me and say, I've been waiting, can I come and see you? Yeah, open the door and just come in. But people don't open the door to come in because of the fact the structures and how they've been brought up and all these types of things means they have to seek permission all the time. Seeking permission, yes, of course you need permission to do certain things, but certain things you don't. You need to have the confidence to be able to do what you're doing. Class in everyday life, class as a moral and symbolic value, respectability, stigma, worth, how you're feeling. Look at what's going on at the present moment with what's going on out there within the US, other countries, etc. All of that. Class is embodied in how we speak, dress, and move. When I first came to London, I don't like wearing tights. Right? I didn't used to wear tights. I don't like wearing tights. They felt, well, how can you not wear tights? I never used to wear a bra. I didn't want to wear a bra. And people would say, well, why do you go around without a bra? Who said I needed to wear one? All things like that, because there's an aspect you need to dress in a certain way, you need to speak in a certain way, you need to move in a certain way, you wear shoes in a certain, all this kind of stuff is what you're judging and how you need to be within your university, within your institute where you're working. All of those things, I push against all of that. Yes, I was brought up to be a lady, but I've pushed against that a lot. I think my clothing says I'm respectable. Think about that. I think my clothing says I'm respectable. Perhaps a lot of that's been blown away with COVID, and people just turn up in their pajamas. Well, there's certain things you need to kind of think about as well. Perhaps you don't need to turn up in your pajamas. You do need to get yourself dressed. But anyway, who am I to tell you about that type of stuff? But it's it's something to think about. Okay, so the last thing around intersection aspects and around race and class plus race, class plus gender, class plus sexuality, class plus disability. Disability in our place, we've just got our first disability strategy. Very excited about that, and it's been funded. We've got money connected to it as well. But then there's a secret situation around disability. Disability is a very wide thing. When you start putting race and disability, everybody goes mad. How can that be? Well, what's the experiences of Roma women and disability? No one talks about that because it's a dirty thing to talk about, but it's important. When you're looking at disability, what's going on? Are you just looking at the kind of the main people which have disability, i.e. the dominant group? What happens to the migrant? What about the migrant population who has disability? What do we do about that? What about sexuality? If we're looking at sexuality and asylum seekers, do we talk about that? Is that part of the conversation or is it not? When we think about gender and class, which gender and class are we talking about? Are we just talking about white women? Is that their space? And anything more than that is too complicated to bring in another woman and talk about that. And when we talk about class and race as well. So I'm going to give you another break. I'm not going to give you 7 minutes. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. And then we're going to come back and I'm going to give you, I've got 2 activities I'm going to do, which I think you'll really enjoy. So I'm going to give you a 5-minute break. Give yourself a break because I don't like being on the screen for too long for you. It's not good for you. So off you go, 5 minutes, and I'll see you back here in 5 minutes. Lee, don't know if anybody's back. I think they are. And I'm going to move on to a bit more practical aspects as well. Like I said, I'm moving fast, so you have to bear with me. I want to have a look at this intersectionality in practice. I'm going to try and do 2 things. One is I want to think about your own practice, and I'm going to do, I've got 5 and 10 minutes, but I'm going to reduce it slightly. And then I want to think about your teaching. And if you do any teaching, I want to see how you can think about that. And then I want to look at your positionality as well. So I'm going to try and do that in the time which we've got. So let's move on swiftly. And Kiki will help me with the rooming when we do the rooms. So when we look at the key concepts, I'm going to use Patricia Collins's and Belger's work. And there's 6 different concepts there: social inequalities, multiple identities, power relations, historical context, structural inequalities, and interconnected systems. That's the area which we use as the 6 core ideas of intersectionality. And I think that's really helpful. The way they unpack that as well is good. I want to show you this, and I just want you to shout out what you see. When you look at this, for a fairer selection, everybody, and I say to you, ponder this. For a fairer selection, everybody, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. Any thoughts about that? Alina, you're laughing there. What are you laughing at, Lena?
Oh, I love it.
Are you going to, which one are you? Are you going to be able to climb the tree?
I'm always telling the students that everyone has to take a fair exam, the same exam, and you now challenge me.
Exactly. Anybody think there's anything good about that picture at all? You've got the bird, the monkey, the penguin, the elephant, the fish, the seal, and you've got the dog. I can't see if anybody's put their hands up, but for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. Which person would be at an advantage? Does Indra? Yes.
I think each of us in different time contexts could be one of these, each of these, in different situations, in different contexts, and feel awkward and not fitting into context and situation and not be able to make and do the task because of positioning, grounding. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you. Absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes you might think you're the elephant and you think, I'm never going to go on that tree because the tree's going to be broken if I tried to climb the tree. And another time you could be the fish and you're thinking, well, unless there's water around the tree and there's a flood, I can maybe get to the top of the tree then if there's a flood. But yeah, absolutely. But I wanted you to think about that. It's a bit of fun, but it's just think about that. Right. I am going to put you in groups in a minute. So, but on your own, I want you, not 5 minutes, you haven't got 5 minutes. I want you to think about these 4 bullet points on your own. You don't need to answer all of them, but I want you to think about them. 1, think about your current team and reflect without naming individuals. Who is progressing well? Which identities or circumstances might be supporting this? Who may be struggling? What structural or cultural factors could be contributing? Where does power sit in your lab? And who has least access to it? Take a picture of it. It's really important. Take a picture. And then what you're going to do is you're going to be spending 1 minute thinking about this now before you go into your group. So just make a few notes on this. You do 1 minute with this. So on your own, you're doing 1 minute at the moment. I'm timing you. And at the same time, you need to take a picture of this one because it's going to be, this is what you're going to discuss. Patterns noticed in who thrives versus who struggles. Identify which identities or circumstances seem systematically advantaged or disadvantaged, and explore how intersectional approach could reshape lab practices related to recruitment, supervision, authorship, that's a big one, or opportunities. You choose one of those and discuss it in your group. And we'll do the groups back into 4 groups. Helpful. I am not going to take any comments from you at this present moment, so just hold on to those comments. What I want to do, I want to go straight into another breakout, and this is going to be on, let's have a look. I want to do this one, 1 minute. Can you see that now?
We cannot hear you.
Oh.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It was on my end. Sorry.
Can you see it still? Yes, good. I want to go straight into this, which is diversifying your teaching. So the first one was looking at when you thought about in practice, the first bit, and this is another bit in practice. So diversifying your teaching. You might think, well, what do you mean by that? And I want you to think about this. Reflect on whose voices, authors, examples are most represented in your teaching. Consider whose perspectives are missing or rarely included, and think about how this shapes what students learn and who feels seen or valued. I'm going to give you just 2 minutes to think about that yourself. I'm not going to put you into a group, but I want you to think about that yourself. Reflect on whose voices, authors, or examples are most represented in your teaching. Consider whose perspectives are missing or rarely included, and think about how this shapes what students learn and who feels seen or valued. You've got 2 minutes just to put some bullet points down.
Hello. I would just like to add something about authors in our teaching. It's all of the authors that we are using are male authors from our books. So maybe there are hidden female authors that we are not proclaiming a lot.
Absolutely.
So maybe we should look for good accounting authors, include them in our curriculum. So now I think that there's only male authors that we are using in our curriculum.
Yeah, that's a really
I'm sure there
point.
should be some at least articles and journals that we could include from female authors as well.
Absolutely. And that type of thing is really important because when you look at my bookshelf, I have a lot of women authors in all aspects, all aspects, whatever they're doing, whether it's management, leadership, economy, whatever it is, methodology. I use women and I use a whole range of diverse people as well. It's important, right? Violetta.
Yeah, thank you. I was actually just gonna jump on the last point that you just mentioned right now, that I think it's important to include a diversity of voices, because I think that sometimes we can fall. I think it's important to include women, but sometimes we also need to see what female voices are included, because often I found that those women who we might include in the curriculum are also white women. And it might be interesting to include, for example, Black men who might have written about things. It might still be a man, but they might be talking about racism, for example. I've been teaching a course right now on the anti-psychiatry movement and on different perspectives on madness. And I personally made the decision to have a class that was not focused on women and madness, but rather on race and madness, leading on the work of Frantz Fanon, who's a man, but he was talking about the race, the experience of race. And for two reasons. First, because I think it's important, again, as I said, to diversify. And second, also, as to the point that you were making before, when we have curriculums matter because these are the ways that identities are made and also stories and histories are framed. And often when we teach, I think it's an important, I understand it as a responsibility to try and create spaces and make known voices that might not otherwise be known. And I take it there as a responsibility to try and introduce maybe things that might not be so easily accessible to other people. And there, I think the diversity question is important because we might, as I said, be talking about men, but they might be disabled or they might be Black or it might be a class issue.
Absolutely. And that is absolutely on point. Thank you. I know I'm running out of time and I'm not going to do an exercise, but I just want to move on to the next bit. I'm really excited about the fact that we're looking at this in a practical aspect. So we did the first bit, the second bit, and you as researchers. Now, if you're not a researcher, forgive me, but you're here for a reason. So as your positionality researcher, I'm going to just give you some key points on this. I'm not going to do you in groups because there's not enough time. But your position as a researcher, the definition of positionality refers to your identity, background, and perspective researcher, as a perspective researcher, and how this influences your research. You might think, well, how does that do that? How you interpret it, how you interpret your data is absolutely about your positionality. Your personal identity in itself, whether it's for education, religion, etc., and the power dynamics, how you reflect on your power in relation to participants and research context. Also, your insider-outsider status. Are you part of the community you're researching or external to it? How does this affect access, trust, interpretation? These are really important points. The way your reflexivity, how the practice ongoing self-awareness. My work on Black women was absolutely challenging to me because I'd never lived with Black women in my life. But I was doing research and I felt like an outsider, but I was an insider. Ask, how do my assumptions, biases shape the research I'm doing? Ethical implications. Be transparent about your role and intentions and consider how your positionality affects. If you're a very privileged woman and you're going into an unprivileged area and you're doing research in that area, think about your privilege you're bringing in. I've done a lot of work in Brazil in the favelas. What does that mean for me and what does it mean for the women I'm working with? Impact on knowledge and production. Acknowledge that your positionality influences what's seen, heard, and also interpreted. And the transparency in writing. Remember, the power is in the pen. How you write down what comes out of that is from you with the power. Clearly state your positionality in your methodology or introduction and explain how it informs approach and interpretation. What can you do based on what I've just said? Educate yourself, advocate for inclusive policies, challenge bias, support colleagues, participate in diversity initiatives. So across this project with Kiki and her colleagues, there are going to be lots and lots of things. You need to get colleagues and yourself to participate so you can grow and learn. Promote a culture of inclusion and provide feedback. That's the things you can do. Questions, we're going through that already. Next steps, I think there's a lot of things you can do. Here's some references. Here's some books. And I think I've done dead on time. 2 minutes left. I'm so sorry. I've had to rush the last bit. Kiki, over to you. If anybody's got some questions, please do ask. I'm happy to have a couple of minutes with you all. But I want to say thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Victoria, for this incredible presentation. On behalf of the Sierra team, thanks a lot. It was great having you. And we hope that we have chances also to continue the exchange because it's always nice to work with you.
Yes, I hope.